For most of us, the story of life on Earth starts with something familiar. A lifeless planet, about 4.5 billion years old, cooling from its fiery birth. Oceans form, lightning strikes, volcanoes erupt, and somewhere in that chaotic mix of chemicals, life takes its first breath, or more accurately, its first cell. That's the picture most textbooks paint. But when scientists look closer at the evidence, that neat sequence becomes less clear and more incredible. Life seems to have appeared surprisingly fast. Earth became stable enough to support oceans roughly 4.3 billion years ago. By 3.8 billion years ago, barely half a billion years later, we already find chemical signatures of living things. In geological terms, that's practically instant. The oldest known microfossils, found in Western Australia and Greenland, push life's appearance even earlier, maybe 3.95 billion years ago. That speed raises a huge question. If life can emerge that quickly, did it really start here? Or did it arrive ready to go? Most scientists still think life originated on Earth itself through a process called abiogenesis. That's the idea that, under the right conditions, simple molecules naturally combined into more complex ones, eventually forming the first self-replicating systems. It's elegant on paper, but it's never been fully demonstrated in the lab. We've made amino acids and simple organic compounds under simulated early Earth conditions, but jumping from chemistry to biology, something that can grow, divide and evolve, remains one of science's biggest gaps. For decades, researchers have tried to bridge that gap with models and experiments. The famous Miller-Urey experiment in the 1950s showed that lightning and a mix of early Earth gases could produce amino acids, the building blocks of life. Later studies found that simple lipids can form bubbles, primitive cell membranes, that trap other molecules inside. And more recently, scientists have shown that RNA, a cousin of DNA, can act both as genetic material and as a catalyst for reactions. That's where the RNA world hypothesis comes from. Maybe early life was based on RNA before DNA took over. But even if that's true, the question lingers. Why did it happen so fast? Earth was bombarded by asteroids for its first few 100 million years. The surface was unstable, the oceans boiling, and yet as soon as things calmed down, life was already here. It's almost as if life was waiting for the chance. That observation doesn't disprove abiogenesis, but it opens the door to alternatives, like Panspermia. Before we get there, it helps to understand how we define civilization, because that's another piece of the puzzle. The earliest human civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, appeared only about 6,000 years ago, but life in its simplest forms had been evolving for nearly 4 billion years before that. Complex, multicellular life didn't even show up until around 600 million years ago, during the Ediacaran period. Dinosaurs came and went, mammals evolved, and finally humans arrived, barely a blink ago in geological time. When we compress that entire history into a single day, life begins just after midnight. Multicellular organisms appear in the late evening, and humans show up seconds before midnight ends. So when we ask, could there have been a civilization before us? We're not talking about just the last few thousand years. We're asking if, in all those empty hours of Earth's day, intelligent life could have arisen and vanished without us knowing. Geologically, it's not impossible. The surface of Earth is constantly recycled. Plate tectonics pushes continents around, erasing entire land masses over hundreds of millions of years. The ocean floor renews itself roughly every 200 million years, meaning anything built down there long ago would be gone. Even land-based artifacts, buildings, tools, entire cities, wouldn't survive intact beyond a few million years. The only things that last are deep geological or chemical traces, and even those fade. So the idea that another civilization could have lived and vanished long before humans isn't immediately absurd. But for that to be true, they'd have had to arise from the same life that existed back then. Microbes, early multicellular organisms, maybe something we haven't discovered yet. That makes the origin of life itself even more important to understand. Because if life didn't start here, if it arrived from elsewhere, then Earth's timeline might just be one link in a much longer chain. That's where panspermia enters the story. Not as a myth or a metaphor, but as a scientific question about whether life can travel from one world to another. It's an idea that challenges our sense of being first, not just as a civilization, but as a species born entirely on this planet. And to explore it properly, we need to look at what the hypothesis actually proposes and why it's taken seriously enough to still be discussed today. The panspermia hypothesis starts with a surprisingly simple question. What if life didn't begin on Earth, but arrived here from somewhere else? At first glance, it sounds like science fiction. Life drifting through space like cosmic pollen. But this idea has deep scientific roots. It doesn't deny evolution or chemistry, it just moves the starting line. Instead of asking how life began on Earth, panspermia asks where life could have begun before Earth. The word itself comes from Greek. Pan meaning all, and sperma meaning seed. In other words, seedein, seeds everywhere. The core idea is that life, or at least the ingredients for it, might be widespread across the universe. Maybe comets, asteroids, or even dust clouds carry microscopic life forms, or their precursors, from one world to another. And if those microbes can survive the journey, they could seed new planets with life when they land. The modern form of this hypothesis began taking shape in the early 20th century. Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius was one of the first to propose that spores could travel between planets, pushed by the pressure of starlight. Later in the 1970s, British astronomers Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe expanded on it, arguing that not just molecules, but actual microorganisms might exist in interstellar space, surviving inside protective grains of dust or ice. Today, panspermia has several versions, ranging from modest to radical. The simplest, lithopanspermia, suggests that life could have been transferred between planets within the same solar system via rocks ejected by impacts. When an asteroid hits a planet hard enough, it can blast debris into space. If that debris contains microbial life, some of it might eventually fall onto another planet. Experiments have shown that microbes can survive inside rock fragments shielded from radiation, at least for a time. And meteorites from Mars have actually been found on Earth, proving the transfer of material between worlds is not just possible, but real. The more ambitious version, interstellar panspermia, proposes that life could travel between star systems. That's harder to imagine, given the distances and radiation involved, but not necessarily impossible if the microbes are deeply buried in comets or asteroids, or if life can enter a dormant state lasting millions of years. A third and even bolder concept, directed panspermia, suggests that intelligent life, perhaps an ancient civilization, deliberately seeded life across planets, either to preserve itself or to spread its biology throughout the cosmos. It's speculation, but it edges uncomfortably close to our opening question. What if we're not the first? What makes panspermia intriguing is that it could help explain a few stubborn mysteries about life's origins. One is the timing. Life appeared on Earth very soon after the planet cooled. If abiogenesis takes billions of years, that's oddly fast. But if microbes were already present, say carried here by meteorites, it would make more sense that life took hold so quickly. Another clue lies in space chemistry. In the past few decades, astronomers have discovered complex organic molecules, the same ones used in biology, floating in interstellar clouds and on the surfaces of comets. Amino acids, sugars, and even nucleobases have been detected in meteorites that fell to Earth. These aren't life, but they're the ingredients for it, already made before our planet was born. Then there's Mars. We know Mars once had liquid water, a thick atmosphere, and volcanic activity, all the conditions life might need. If microbes existed there billions of years ago, it's not impossible that impacts could have blasted them into space, sending some to Earth. In that case, life here might actually be Martian in origin. That idea, sometimes called Mars to Earth panspermia, has gained enough credibility that NASA and ESA both consider it in their planetary protection policies, rules designed to prevent contamination between planets. Of course, panspermia doesn't actually solve the ultimate mystery. Even if life came from elsewhere, it still had to start somewhere. The hypothesis simply pushes the origin problem one step back in time, maybe to another planet, another star system, or even an earlier generation of stars. Yet that shift in perspective matters. It means that life could be older than Earth itself. It could mean that Earth is part of a galactic family tree of biology, all sharing a common ancestor that predates our solar system. The biggest question then is not just if life can move between worlds, but how? Could microbes really survive the violence of impact ejection, the vacuum of space, the radiation, and the entry into another atmosphere? Surprisingly, experiments suggest they might. Bacteria, spores, and even small multicellular organisms like tardigrades have been shown to survive the harsh conditions of space. Extreme cold, vacuum, and radiation for extended periods when shielded. In one experiment aboard the International Space Station, spores of Bacillus subtilis survived nearly 6 years of exposure to space when embedded in protective layers. Some lichen species and microscopic animals recovered after years outside the ISS as well. That doesn't mean life is casually hopping between planets every day, but it makes the idea scientifically plausible. The physics works, the chemistry works, and biology is more resilient than we once thought. In fact, one of the strongest arguments in favour of panspermia is that life seems too adaptable, from microbes living deep under Antarctic ice to those thriving in boiling vents on the ocean floor, or kilometres below Earth's crust. If life can survive all that, the gap between worlds doesn't seem quite so impossible anymore. Still, the hypothesis faces scepticism. It's hard to prove and harder to test directly. No one has yet found an unmistakable microbe that originated off Earth. If we ever do, say on Mars, Europa, or Enceladus, the key question will be whether it shares our biochemistry. If Martian life uses the same genetic code or amino acid patterns as ours, that would be strong evidence of a shared origin. If it's completely different, that might point to independent evolution. Either result would be groundbreaking. Either we're part of a larger cosmic lineage, or life emerges easily anywhere conditions allow. But there's another angle here that ties back to our opening question. If panspermia is real, and life can spread across planets, what stops it from spreading civilizations too? What if, somewhere out there, or perhaps long ago right here, life evolved intelligence, technology, and the ability to cross space, leaving traces we no longer recognize? If life can move through the galaxy, maybe civilization isn't a one-time event either. Maybe it's part of that same ancient cycle of seeding and renewal that built us. To get there, though, we first need to ask, what's the actual evidence supporting panspermia, and how far does it really go? If the panspermia hypothesis were only a poetic idea, it would have faded long ago. Instead, it keeps resurfacing because of a growing pile of evidence, real, measurable data, that makes the concept surprisingly hard to dismiss. Scientists aren't saying panspermia must be true, but they can't ignore how many observations line up with it. The first clue lies in chemistry. In 1969, a meteorite landed near Murchison, Australia. When researchers analysed it, they found more than 70 different amino acids, molecules essential to life, and many of them weren't the same ones found in biology on Earth. That meant they hadn't been contaminated here. They formed in space. Similar finds followed: the Tagish Lake meteorite in Canada, the Orgueil meteorite in France, and many others all carried a mix of organic compounds, including nucleobases, the ingredients of DNA and RNA. These weren't rare coincidences. They showed that complex organic chemistry happens naturally in space, even in the absence of life. That chemistry isn't limited to meteorites. Observations using radio telescopes have detected molecules like formaldehyde, methanol, ethanol, and glycine, the simplest amino acid, floating in interstellar clouds. Some of these clouds, such as Sagittarius B2 near the galactic center, contain vast quantities of organic material. That means before any planet forms, its building blocks already carry a chemical head start. When a new world condenses from that cloud, it inherits these molecules. So when life appeared quickly on Earth, maybe it didn't start from scratch. It began with a ready-made chemical pantry. Then there's the timing. As mentioned earlier, life shows up on Earth almost as soon as it could. The oldest known evidence, carbon isotopic ratios consistent with biological activity, comes from rocks that are 3.8 billion years old. That's almost immediately after the late heavy bombardment, the period when Earth was pounded by asteroids. The odds that complex chemistry developed that fast by chance seem small. But if microbes or prebiotic materials arrived from elsewhere during or after that bombardment, the timeline suddenly looks less miraculous. In fact, the bombardment itself could have been the delivery system. During that era, billions of tons of rock were exchanged between planets. Massive impacts on Mars could have ejected debris containing frozen microbes or organic matter. Computer simulations show that such fragments could reach Earth within tens of thousands of years, a blink in cosmic terms. Some fragments might have spent longer in space, But as long as they remained shielded deep within rock, they could survive radiation and vacuum. Experiments have tested pieces of this scenario. In 2010, researchers at the University of Kent simulated asteroid impacts in the lab and found that bacteria encased in rock could survive shock pressures comparable to those in real collisions. Other studies exposed microorganisms to space conditions aboard the International Space Station. Deinococcus radiodurans, one of the toughest known bacteria, survived over a year in orbit when protected by layers of clay or salt. Even spores of simple bacteria have lasted years in direct sunlight, hinting that if shielded by rock, survival for millions of years might not be impossible. There's also the fact that life on Earth is extremely adaptable. Microbes thrive in boiling hydrothermal vents, in the frozen lakes of Antarctica, inside nuclear reactors, and several kilometers underground where sunlight never reaches. Some endure intense radiation, others live on pure sulfur or methane. This resilience suggests life could easily survive extreme environments on other planets or even interplanetary journeys. It also supports the idea that life might not be fragile or rare. It might be a fundamental self-preserving phenomenon wherever conditions permit. Another line of evidence comes from the isotopic and molecular similarities between Earth and Martian meteorites. We've identified more than 100 meteorites that originated on Mars, thrown into space by impacts and later falling here. Some of them, like the famous ALH 84001 discovered in Antarctica, contain tiny structures that resemble fossilized microbes. That claim is controversial. Many scientists think those shapes can form through non-biological processes. But the chemistry is still interesting. These meteorites contain carbonate globules, magnetite crystals, and organic molecules that mirror features of Earth's ancient rocks. It's possible that early Mars and Earth shared not only material but maybe biology itself. Even the discovery of exoplanets strengthens Panspermia's plausibility. In the 1990s, we didn't know if planets around other stars were common. Now we know there are billions, some with Earth-like sizes and orbits. That means countless opportunities for life to start and spread. Comets and asteroids travel between systems over long timescales, and though the odds for any single rock to reach another star are tiny, the universe has time on its side. Over billions of years, even rare events become likely. And if life's seeds can survive long enough, they could travel astonishing distances. A dormant microbe hidden deep inside an icy comet might remain frozen for hundreds of millions of years, waking up only when the comet warms near a star. That cycle of freezing and thawing, travelling and seeding, could scatter life across entire regions of the galaxy. There's also a striking clue closer to home: the similarities in life's basic chemistry. Every organism on Earth uses the same 20 amino acids and the same genetic code, with only tiny variations. If life arose independently multiple times on Earth, we'd expect more diversity in those fundamental choices. The fact that everything shares one template could mean a single origin, a seed event that began elsewhere and took root here. That said, none of this is definitive proof. Each line of evidence, organic meteorites, fast origins, microbial toughness, can be explained without invoking panspermia. But when combined, they form a pattern that's hard to ignore. It suggests that the universe is chemically fertile and that life may not need Earth's exact recipe to begin. Some scientists see this as a humbling reminder that we might be part of a larger, ancient biological network. Others see it as motivation. If panspermia is real, then life on other worlds might not just resemble ours. It might literally be our distant cousin. Either way, the implications are staggering. Yet before accepting panspermia as fact, it's important to recognise what it can't explain. It might tell us how life spread, but not how it started in the first place. And testing it isn't easy. It's one thing to show life can survive space travel, and another to prove it actually did. That's where the skepticism begins, and why the debate around panspermia is still far from over. For every scientist intrigued by the possibility that life came from space, there's another who points out that panspermia doesn't really answer the hardest question. It just moves it somewhere else. If life didn't start on Earth, where did it start? Saying it came from somewhere else can feel like cosmic hand-waving unless we can define that somewhere and show how it worked. That's one of the biggest philosophical and scientific limitations of panspermia. It may describe a delivery mechanism, but not an origin mechanism. Even if microbes came here on a meteorite, they still had to evolve somewhere first. So while panspermia could explain how life spreads, it doesn't explain how life begins. In that sense, it complements but doesn't replace abiogenesis. The second major objection is survivability. Space is brutal. There's vacuum, radiation, freezing cold, and constant bombardment by high-energy cosmic rays. The journey between planets might take thousands or even millions of years. For microbes to survive, they'd have to endure complete dormancy for unimaginable timescales. That's not impossible. Some Earth microbes have revived after tens of millions of years trapped in salt crystals, but the odds of surviving ejection, space travel, and re-entry are small. Let's break that down. When a large asteroid hits a planet, the shock pressures and temperatures are immense, thousands of degrees, enough to vaporize most matter. Only the interior of a rock shielded from the blast would offer any protection. Then, during space travel, the outside of that rock would be exposed to cosmic radiation and ultraviolet light. Even a few centimeters of shielding might not block all of it. Over time, radiation breaks down DNA and cell structures. So any microbe that survived would have to be extraordinarily resilient and deeply buried. When that rock finally falls onto another planet, it faces a new threat: re-entry. As it slams through an atmosphere, the surface burns. Again, the interior might stay cool enough, but only if the rock is large enough. Simulations show that small meteorites heat through entirely, killing any potential passengers. That means only a tiny fraction of ejected material would ever deliver viable life. Critics argue that this chain of survival, impact, ejection, travel, re-entry, is too improbable to explain the near-instant appearance of life on Earth. And even if a few microbes could survive, how many would need to arrive to successfully seed an entire planet? We don't have those numbers, but they'd have to be large enough to overcome all odds of destruction, mutation, and sterilization. There's also a deeper problem of evidence. For panspermia to move from possibility to proof, we'd need to find life somewhere else that unmistakably shares ancestry with ours. That means it would have to use the same genetic code, the same amino acids, or at least a similar biochemistry. Without that, there's no way to tell if life on Mars or Europa, for example, is related to us, or simply another example of life forming independently. That's why missions like NASA's Perseverance rover, ESA's ExoMars program, and future sample return projects matter. If we bring back Martian material and find fossilized or active microbes, genetic analysis could reveal whether they're our distant relatives. If they are, that's a strong argument for panspermia. Perhaps Mars seeded Earth, or both came from a common ancestor elsewhere. If they're completely unrelated, it tells us something just as profound. Life can start from scratch under different conditions. Another issue is that panspermia sometimes attracts speculation beyond what evidence supports. In popular discussions, it's often blended with ancient aliens or myths of lost cosmic civilizations. Those versions might sound exciting, but they blur the line between science and fantasy. The scientific version of panspermia doesn't require alien engineers. It only requires that natural processes, over billions of years, can move life from one world to another. Directed panspermia, the idea that an advanced civilization intentionally seeded planets, is still an open topic, but there's no solid evidence for it. The main reason it's considered at all is because Nobel laureate Francis Crick, who co-discovered DNA structure, suggested it as a thought experiment in the 1970s. Even he treated it as a last resort idea, not a proven theory. Then there's the question of testability. A good scientific hypothesis must be falsifiable. There must be a way to prove it wrong. That's difficult with panspermia because so many of its events happened billions of years ago. Even if we find microbes on Mars or in the clouds of Venus, we might never know if they came from here or developed there. Our evidence is limited to the chemistry we can measure today, long after the fact. In addition, panspermia raises tricky implications for planetary protection. If life can travel between worlds naturally, what does that mean for our exploration of the solar system? Every time we send a probe or lander, we risk contaminating another planet with Earth microbes, or bringing alien ones back. The policies NASA and ESA follow, like sterilizing spacecraft, are built partly on this concern. Ironically, the more plausible panspermia seems, the more cautious we have to be about spreading or confusing life signals ourselves. Finally, there's a philosophical objection. Some argue that panspermia doesn't make our existence any easier to explain. It just shifts the mystery to a larger scale. Saying life came from space doesn't remove the question of how the first living system formed. It just relocates it. If the origin happened elsewhere, we'd still need to understand the environment's chemistry and physics. So, while panspermia might describe how life arrived here, it doesn't tell us why life exists at all. Despite all that, panspermia remains scientifically valuable. It pushes researchers to study how life survives in extreme conditions, how planets exchange material, and how we might detect biology beyond Earth. It encourages cross-disciplinary work between biology, geology, and astronomy. Even if it turns out that life did begin here independently, the tools we've developed while testing panspermia will still help us recognize life elsewhere. So, while skepticism is warranted, it's not dismissal. The hypothesis sits in a grey area, partly plausible, partly unprovable for now. It stretches science without breaking it, and maybe that's why it still fascinates researchers decades after it was proposed. But there's another idea that takes this discussion to a completely different level. What if it's not just life that's older than we think, but civilization itself? What if, deep in Earth's past, an intelligent species rose long before us and vanished so completely that we only now begin to wonder if it was ever there? That question brings us to the Silurian hypothesis and the search for signs of civilizations that might have come and gone long before ours. The notion that humans might not be the first intelligent civilization on Earth sounds like the plot of a science fiction novel. But it's a question some scientists have asked seriously. In 2018, NASA climatologist Gavin Schmidt and astrophysicist Adam Frank published a paper known as the Silurian hypothesis, named after a fictional reptilian species from Doctor Who. The idea wasn't to claim ancient aliens or secret lost worlds, but to ask a scientific question. If a civilization had existed on Earth millions of years before humans, would we be able to detect it today? Their conclusion was both fascinating and unsettling. In most cases, probably not. When we talk about civilization, we're not just referring to life or even intelligence, but to a society capable of altering its environment on a planetary scale through energy use, agriculture, industry, or technology. Humans have only been doing that for a few thousand years, yet in that short time, we've already left unmistakable geological traces: plastics in ocean sediments, concrete in rock layers, nitrogen spikes from fertilizers, and isotopic signatures from nuclear tests. Those markers are collectively known as the Anthropocene signal, evidence of our presence that future geologists could detect millions of years from now. So Schmidt and Frank asked, if a prior civilization had done something similar, would any of its traces still remain? The answer depends on how deep time erases its own history. Earth's surface is constantly recycled. Continental crust lasts longer than ocean crust, but even that changes over tens or hundreds of millions of years. Mountains rise and erode. Ocean floors are subducted back into the mantle. Any ruins or cities older than a few million years would be gone, crushed and melted by geology. Even the Great Pyramids, if abandoned today, would erode into sand within 10,000 years. Over millions, nothing recognizable would survive. What about artifacts buried deep underground or in stable regions? Those might last longer, but deep burial also means they'd be almost impossible to find without already knowing where to look. The odds of randomly discovering traces of a civilization from, say, 100 million years ago are vanishingly small. Instead, we'd have to look for indirect evidence, global changes that can't be explained by natural processes alone. The Silurian hypothesis suggests several possible markers. For example, unusual carbon isotope ratios could reveal massive fossil fuel burning. A sudden temperature spike or extinction event without a clear geological cause might suggest industrial activity. Unnatural materials like synthetic polymers, plastics, or certain heavy elements could also be clues, though they'd have to survive the long grind of time. In Earth's geological record, there are several mysterious events that might fit those patterns. Though so far natural explanations suffice. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, about 56 million years ago, saw a sudden global temperature rise of 5 to 8 degrees Celsius and a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere. It wiped out many species and drastically changed ecosystems. Some have compared it to our current climate trend, except it happened far earlier. The official explanation points to volcanic activity and methane release from the seafloor. But if we didn't know about humans, we might interpret today's carbon spike as a natural event too. That's the unsettling part. The geological record doesn't easily distinguish between natural and artificial causes. There are other strange moments too. Around 252 million years ago, during the Permian-Triassic extinction, Earth lost over 90% of its species. Some scientists suspect massive volcanic eruptions triggered it, but the exact chain of events remains debated. In theory, an industrial civilization could cause similar devastation through runaway pollution or energy misuse. It's not evidence that one did, it just shows how easy it would be for deep time to blur the difference. Beyond chemical traces, we might look for unusual minerals or isotopes. Industrial processes can create rare combinations of elements that don't occur naturally. For example, modern nuclear reactors and weapons testing produce specific plutonium isotopes that don't exist in nature. If a civilization millions of years ago had similar technology, those isotopes could be trapped in ancient rocks. So far, none have been found. But Earth's crust is vast, and we've sampled only a fraction of it. Another possible clue lies in sediment layers. If a past civilization had widespread agriculture, mining, or plastic production, we might detect shifts in sediment composition, sudden increases in microplastics, fertilizer residues, or synthetic compounds. Again, time works against us. Plastics degrade, organic molecules decay, and sediments are often reworked by later geological processes. After tens of millions of years, even clear signs could vanish into ambiguity. The Silurian hypothesis isn't about proving that ancient civilizations existed. It's about testing our assumptions. We often think of human civilization as unique because we don't see evidence of predecessors, but maybe that absence isn't proof of uniqueness. Maybe it's just how geology works. If even our global civilization could vanish with barely a trace after 100 million years, then asking whether others existed before us becomes a valid scientific question, not a fringe one. It also forces us to consider what intelligence might mean in the broader context of evolution. Intelligence has evolved multiple times. Octopuses, dolphins, elephants, crows all show advanced problem-solving and communication skills. It's not impossible that something like us could have evolved before, perhaps from a now extinct lineage. Imagine a species of intelligent cephalopods during the late Cretaceous, or tool-using reptiles in the Triassic. Without fossils showing clear evidence of technology, we'd never know. Even the fossil record itself is incomplete. We've discovered millions of fossils, but they represent a tiny fraction of the life that's existed. Soft-bodied creatures rarely fossilize. Many rock layers are inaccessible or have eroded away. So, if an intelligent species had a small population or short duration, it might leave almost no trace. All of this doesn't mean that Earth hosted earlier civilizations. It means we can't completely rule it out, and that realization changes how we think about our own longevity. If civilizations can rise and vanish so completely that their memory erases from the planet itself, what does that say about us? The idea of earlier Earth civilizations also ties naturally into panspermia. If life can spread between planets, could civilizations themselves be part of that process? Maybe intelligence, like biology, migrates, appearing, collapsing, and re-emerging across worlds. Perhaps the spark that reached Earth wasn't just microbial, but cultural, carried forward in ways we don't yet understand. It's a vast and speculative leap, but it highlights one thing clearly. The story of life on Earth might not be a straight line from chemistry to humanity. It could be part of a looping, repeating cycle, where worlds give rise to civilizations, civilizations fall, and life continues on, carrying hints of memory through time and space. To make sense of that possibility, we need to look at how the two big ideas, panspermia and ancient civilizations, fit together. If both hold even a grain of truth, then our planet's history might be just one chapter in a story that began long before Earth was even born. You said, next. Science writer said, at first, panspermia and the idea of an ancient pre-human civilization seemed like two separate questions, one about biology, the other about history. But when you think about them side by side, they start to merge into something deeper, a continuous story, about how life and intelligence might move through the universe. Panspermia suggests life doesn't begin in isolation. It spreads. The Silurian hypothesis asks whether civilizations too might come and go in cycles, sometimes leaving no visible trace. What happens if both are true? If life really travels between planets, then Earth's biosphere might not be unique. It might be part of a much older biological network, seeded long before our world even cooled. In that case, humanity wouldn't be the first civilization, not just in the sense of Earth's history, but in a cosmic sense. We'd be one more link in a long evolutionary chain that began somewhere else. The earliest spark of life could have started on another planet, around another star billions of years ago, survived extinction events, travelled across interstellar space, inside meteoroids, and eventually found its way here. If that lineage developed intelligence somewhere along the way, if one of its branches achieved civilization before us, then technically, we'd be descendants of a civilization older than Earth itself. That's the far end of speculation, but it's worth exploring why it's not completely impossible. For one, panspermia doesn't need life to be simple. We often imagine tiny bacteria crossing space, but what if the transfer involved genetic material, viruses, spores, or even engineered DNA fragments, created by an older species? Some researchers have pointed out that DNA is incredibly good at preserving information, and under the right conditions, fragments could survive for millions of years. If those fragments drifted through space and landed in the right environment, they might merge with native chemistry, nudging early life in a particular direction. That's one version of directed panspermia. Not a civilization physically travelling here, but its biology guiding ours through genetic legacy. Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel first proposed this idea in 1973. They weren't claiming aliens did it. They were pointing out that, if life on Earth seems improbably complex for its age, maybe it had help. A civilization facing extinction might deliberately spread microorganisms or genetic material to nearby planets as a way of ensuring continuity, like planting seeds in many gardens, knowing only some will grow. The result would be planets where life emerges almost instantly after conditions become stable. Sound familiar? That's exactly what happened on Earth. Now imagine a civilization capable of doing that, not out of malice or curiosity, but simply as a form of survival. Over billions of years, their biological fingerprints would spread through countless worlds. They might never visit those planets, never build monuments, never leave machines, but their biochemistry would persist. Their descendants wouldn't even know their origins, because evolution would erase the memory. If humanity came from that chain, then in a very real sense, we wouldn't be the first civilization. We'd be part of their legacy, carrying their molecular signature forward without realizing it. The other way these ideas connect is through time. On Earth, life has been around for at least 3.8 billion years. That's long enough for not just one, but multiple cycles of complexity to rise and fall. Evolution isn't a one-way climb, it's a series of experiments. If intelligence is a natural outcome of evolution, given enough time, then it might have appeared before and disappeared again. On Earth or elsewhere, panspermia could be the mechanism that keeps those sparks alive, carrying the potential for civilization from one planet to another, even after catastrophes wipe out life in one place. Think about how often Earth has reset itself. The Permian extinction erased nearly all species 252 million years ago. The asteroid that hit 66 million years ago wiped out the dinosaurs and reshaped ecosystems overnight. If intelligent life had existed before either of those events, its traces would have been obliterated. But if any microorganisms from that civilization had made it into space, say, trapped in ejected debris from the impact, they might have travelled to other worlds. In that case, the cycle of panspermia wouldn't just spread life, it would spread memory. Each planet would carry echoes of the last one, biological or even cultural, waiting to start again. This concept might sound far-fetched, but some modern thinkers have considered similar ideas under different names. Physicist Paul Davies has written about the possibility of a shadow biosphere, a form of life on Earth unrelated to ours, perhaps descended from an earlier lineage. If that existed, it would mean panspermia, and prior civilizations aren't hypothetical. They're part of our planet's layered biological history. So far, we haven't found direct evidence for such an alternate biosphere, but the search continues in extreme environments like deep underground or high radiation zones, where unique microbial lineages might survive. Even without direct evidence, the logic is seductive. If panspermia can move microbes, then over cosmic timescales, it could move complexity too. Civilization might not just be a one-off event that happened on Earth in the last few thousand years. It could be a recurring feature of life across the universe, with each rise leaving just enough traces for the next to build upon. And maybe, in subtle ways, we're already carrying those traces. Some biologists have speculated that certain parts of our genetic code might contain patterns that don't make sense from an evolutionary perspective standpoint. Redundant sequences or symbolic signatures that don't affect function but might reflect an earlier structure. Most of these anomalies are likely natural byproducts of evolution, but if directed panspermia were real, that's where we'd look for its fingerprints, in our own DNA. Even our myths reflect this intuition. Nearly every ancient culture carries stories about a time before humans, about lost civilizations, gods descending from the sky, or wisdom passed down from earlier beings. From the Sumerian Anunnaki to the Hopi's previous worlds, these stories often describe cycles of destruction and rebirth. It's tempting to interpret them as distant cultural echoes of something our species once knew and forgot. Of course, there's no evidence those myths record literal history, but they show how deeply this idea resonates. Somewhere in us, we sense that life, and perhaps intelligence, is older than we remember. The scientific side of this, though, is what really matters. If panspermia and prior civilizations are linked, they point toward a universe where life is both resilient and cyclical. Civilizations rise, fall, and maybe, through biology, technology, or intention, seed the next generation of worlds. The boundaries between origin, evolution, and inheritance blur. Our story might not be the first chapter of life on Earth, and Earth might not be the first stage for life in the cosmos. To understand what traces such a legacy could leave behind, we have to look at the Earth itself, its rocks, sediments, and atmosphere, and ask what evidence an earlier civilization, whether homegrown or imported, might leave for us to find billions of years later. If an intelligent species had walked the Earth long before humans, what could possibly remain after millions, or even hundreds of millions of years? That question gets to the core of the Silurian hypothesis, and the answers depend on how nature handles memory. Our planet is good at creating life, but terrible at keeping records. The older the evidence, the less likely it is to survive. So, to even imagine detecting a civilization older than our own, we have to think not in terms of artifacts like tools or buildings, but in terms of chemistry and geology, the deep, subtle fingerprints left on a planet's surface. The first and most obvious kind of evidence would be chemical. Modern human civilization has already altered Earth's chemistry in measurable ways. Our burning of fossil fuels is changing the ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere and ocean. Carbon from fossil fuels is lighter, rich in carbon-12, so as we release it, the global balance between carbon-12 and carbon-13 shifts. That's a signature geologists thousands of years from now will be able to see in sediment cores. The same goes for nitrogen isotopes from fertilizers, sulfur compounds from industry, and heavy metals from mining. If a past civilization had industrialized on a global scale, it might have left comparable anomalies, carbon spikes, strange isotopic ratios, or unusual concentrations of metals like lead, mercury, or rare earth elements in ancient rocks. Another potential clue is synthetic material. Plastics, for example, are uniquely human in origin. No natural process creates their long polymer chains. Even though they degrade in sunlight and seawater, tiny fragments known as microplastics are already accumulating in sediments worldwide. Over millions of years, those layers could harden into rock, preserving a distinct polymer signature. If a civilization millions of years ago produced anything comparable, we might find molecular fossils, tiny residues of polymers, resins, or engineered compounds that don't occur naturally. Detecting them would require knowing exactly what to look for, which is difficult when we don't even know what that civilization's chemistry would have been. Beyond chemistry, there's mineral evidence. Industrial processes often create mineral forms that wouldn't otherwise exist. Humans have already made new minerals like trinitite, the glassy residue from nuclear explosions, and various aluminum alloys that don't occur in nature. These materials are geologically stable. They could survive for millions of years. In fact, scientists have catalogued more than 200 human-made minerals that could mark our presence in future rock layers. If a previous civilization used metals or composites unknown in nature, trace amounts might still exist, hidden in certain strata. The challenge is distinguishing them from natural minerals that form under unusual conditions. There's also the question of energy signatures. Industrial societies change their environment not only through materials, but through heat and atmospheric chemistry. Our own industrial age has increased global temperatures, altered ocean acidity, and changed sedimentation rates in rivers and deltas. Similar large-scale effects from an earlier civilization could show up as sudden shifts in the geological record. Rapid warming or cooling, sediment disruption, or extinction patterns inconsistent with known volcanic or impact events. The Paleocene-Eocene. Thermal maximum remains a striking candidate, a rapid temperature jump and carbon release that looks eerily familiar to our current Anthropocene pattern. Though the accepted explanation is massive methane release, the event demonstrates how easily an industrial-like pulse could hide inside natural data. Still, a civilization wouldn't necessarily leave global effects. What if it were smaller, localized, short-lived, or primarily ocean-based? That would make its traces even harder to detect. Oceanic crust is continually recycled through plate tectonics, vanishing every 200 million years. So any seafaring or aquatic civilization existing before that would have had its entire world swallowed back into the mantle. Land-based traces would fare little better. Erosion, burial, and metamorphism would erase most structures within tens of millions of years. Even our tallest skyscrapers, if abandoned today, would crumble and dissolve long before the next major ice age. Fossils, which seem like obvious evidence, are actually poor markers for civilization. Fossilization requires specific conditions: rapid burial, low oxygen, mineral-rich water. Most species, even dominant ones, leave no fossils at all. If a past intelligent species had a small population or lived mostly in regions prone to erosion, we might never find a trace of them. And even if we did, recognizing their intelligence from fossil remains would be tricky. A species could have had advanced cognition or tool use without leaving obvious physical adaptations. Think of dolphins, highly intelligent, social, and capable of problem solving. Yet their anatomy leaves no clue of technology. Another possible signature is radioactivity. Human nuclear activity, power plants, weapons testing, creates isotopes like plutonium-244 and technetium-99 that don't occur naturally. These elements have half-lives long enough to persist for millions of years. If found in ancient rock layers where no natural process could produce them, they'd raise serious questions. So far, none have been detected. But again, our sampling of Earth's crust is tiny. The deepest cores reach only a few kilometres, a scratch on the surface of a planet with a radius of over 6,000 kilometres. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. It may just reflect how little of the deep Earth we've studied. We rely heavily on surface geology and sediment cores, which rarely extend past a few 100 million years. Anything older lies in metamorphosed rock or oceanic crust long since recycled. Even if chemical or isotopic traces existed, they could have been erased or diffused beyond recognition. Some researchers have suggested looking for technofossils, objects or materials made by technology that might survive extreme timescales. On Mars, for instance, artificial satellites or rovers could last for millions of years because there's no weather or plate tectonics to destroy them. Earth, by contrast, is far less forgiving. Our technofossils would be crushed, melted, and mixed back into the crust. Yet a few might persist: deeply buried mines, radioactive waste repositories, or large underground structures could leave strange geophysical anomalies detectable by future species, much like how we can see fossilized coral reefs or ancient lava tubes today. There's one more, subtler possibility: information embedded in biology itself. If an earlier civilization had the ability to manipulate genetics, it could, in theory, encode data into DNA. DNA is an incredibly efficient storage medium. It can last for hundreds of thousands of years under the right conditions and pack immense amounts of information into a microscopic scale. Though natural mutations would scramble it over millions of years, some pattern could theoretically persist. While this idea borders on speculation, scientists have already demonstrated digital data storage in synthetic DNA today. If we can do it, perhaps someone else could have done it long before us. So far, no such anomalies have been found. But what's important is that our search has only just begun. Geologists and astrobiologists are starting to examine ancient rocks and sediments with new eyes, asking whether unusual isotopic or mineral signatures might hint at something more. These investigations are careful, not sensational. They don't assume ancient civilizations existed, but they test whether the record could even preserve one if it did. And that leads to a humbling realization. Even with all our science, we might not be able to detect a civilization that lived tens of millions of years ago. Time erases nearly everything. The fossil record is incomplete, the surface renews, and chemistry resets. If we disappeared tomorrow, in 100 million years, there might be almost nothing left to prove we were here. That's not pessimism. It's perspective. It means that absence of evidence can't be taken as proof of non-existence. In that sense, the search for earlier civilizations isn't really about uncovering ancient ruins. It's about understanding how fragile the record of civilization is. And that lesson circles back to us. If even an industrial society could vanish without a trace, what does that say about how temporary our own chapter might be? Before we explore that implication, though, there's a more practical question. If Earth hides its past so well, what forces are responsible for that erasure? What natural processes could wipe the slate clean so completely that an entire world's history disappears? Earth is relentless in its ability to recycle itself. Unlike the Moon or Mars, where craters, mountains, and ancient surfaces stay frozen in time, our planet constantly renews its skin. Every few 100 million years, the entire face of the Earth changes. That means if a civilization had existed long before us, even one that spanned continents, the evidence wouldn't need to be hidden. It would simply be gone. The planet itself would have erased it. The first and most powerful eraser is plate tectonics. The continents we live on ride atop massive slabs of rock that move, collide, and dive beneath one another. When one plate slides under another, it takes the surface, and everything on it, down into the mantle, where it melts and becomes magma. Oceanic crust in particular doesn't last long on geological timescales. It's all recycled within about 200 million years. That means any civilization based on or near the ocean floor would have been swallowed. Its entire world turned back into molten rock. Even continental crust, though more stable, is constantly reshaped. Mountains rise and erode. Valleys fill, basins flood, and new layers bury the old. After a few 100 million years, a continent's surface can look entirely different from what it once was. Next comes erosion, the slow but unstoppable wearing away of everything that stands above ground. Wind, rain, ice, and chemical weathering reduce even the hardest stone to dust. Over time, the tallest structures crumble into rubble, then sand, then soil. The Great Pyramids, our most enduring monuments, are already eroding after only 4,500 years. Given 10 million years of wind and rain, even the largest human-made mountain would vanish. Given 100 million, the landscape would forget we ever built anything at all. Sedimentation is erosion's quiet partner. As rocks and structures break down, rivers carry their fragments to the sea, where they settle as new layers of sediment. Over long enough periods, those layers harden into new rock. That process not only buries, but also disguises what came before, blending traces of civilization into the natural geology. Concrete could turn into limestone. Asphalt could resemble tar deposits. Even plastic might degrade into a thin, unremarkable layer of carbon-rich shale. To a geologist millions of years in the future, that layer might look like a brief chemical anomaly. Interesting, but not obviously artificial. Then there's climate change and ice ages, which periodically reset the surface. Ice sheets can grind continents flat, scouring away soil and rock alike. The last ice age reshaped nearly all of North America and Europe just 12,000 years ago. Multiply that by dozens of cycles over millions of years, and any sign of ancient structures would be pulverized and buried beneath glacial debris. Tropical regions face their own form of destruction through intense weathering, where constant rain and heat dissolve rock faster than anywhere else on Earth. Even more dramatic are mass extinction events, which can transform the entire planet in a geological instant. The asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs, for instance, left a global layer of iridium-rich clay. But not much else. If an advanced species had lived in that world, almost nothing of its cities or technology would have survived the inferno of impact, the tsunamis, and the centuries of environmental collapse that followed. The same goes for the massive volcanic eruptions that caused the Permian extinction 252 million years ago, which covered vast regions in lava flows and released enough gas to poison the atmosphere. Events like these are nature's version of a hard reset, burning, melting, and burying the evidence of everything that came before. Subduction zones, volcanic resurfacing, and seafloor spreading all contribute to this planetary renewal. When volcanic islands form, they eventually erode and sink. When mountain ranges rise, they are worn down. Even entire continents, like the ancient land of Rodinia or Pangaea, have appeared and disappeared in cycles. Every few 100 million years, the planet assembles a new supercontinent, rearranging everything. Whatever civilizations or life forms existed before those cycles would be erased not by mystery, but by physics and time. There's also the cosmic element. Earth's orbit through the galaxy isn't static. It passes through regions of higher radiation, denser cosmic dust, and sometimes even near supernovae. These events can trigger extinctions or wipe out large parts of the biosphere. An advanced civilization, if it had existed during one of those galactic rough patches, might not have survived. Even if it did, the fallout, radiation, climate shifts, and biological collapse would have buried its memory. Another subtle destroyer is chemical decay. Many of the materials we associate with civilization, metals, glass, concrete, are far less durable than we imagine. Iron rusts, copper corrodes, glass devitrifies, and concrete eventually crumbles. After only a few thousand years, a modern city without maintenance would be a ruin. After 1,000,000, it would be dust and minerals. Only a few artificial isotopes or stable alloys might endure as hints that something intelligent once existed. Then there's biological recycling. Life itself contributes to erasing traces of civilization. Bacteria consume organic material. Fungi break down wood and textiles. Plants and animals reshape landscapes. Coral reefs, forests, and soil all grow over ruins, consuming them in their cycles of growth and decay. Given enough time, nature doesn't just reclaim, it forgets. Earth's atmosphere also plays a role. Oxygen, which makes complex life possible, is also one of the most corrosive agents in nature. It reacts with nearly every element, slowly turning metals into oxides and rocks into dust. Without constant renewal, even monuments of steel and stone dissolve under oxygen's slow assault. Taken together, these processes form a kind of planetary amnesia. Earth remembers in patterns and chemistry, not in artifacts or stories. It keeps the fossil of a shell, but erases the city built beside it. It preserves layers of ash, but not the hands that made the fire. So, if there was a civilization millions of years before us, it would have to leave behind something incredibly robust, or incredibly subtle, to survive the Earth's constant renewal. That's why researchers like Schmidt and Frank focused on global markers rather than direct remains. They asked, what could persist even after continents have shifted and oceans have vanished? Their answer was simple: changes in the composition of the planet itself. If a civilization changed the climate, altered the carbon cycle, or introduced synthetic isotopes, those might persist as faint echoes in the rock record. Otherwise, everything else would be gone. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. It's not just about whether other civilizations existed, it's about how easily any civilization can vanish. The forces that shape Earth are so immense that even our modern world, with satellites and skyscrapers, could be erased almost completely in a few tens of millions of years. In that sense, the absence of evidence for earlier civilizations might not be a mystery at all. It might simply be the natural state of a living, changing planet. But if Earth can erase so much, it's worth asking what that means for the idea of panspermia. If life, and maybe civilization, keeps starting over, spreading from one planet to another, perhaps that renewal is built into the system. The destruction of one world might seed another. The loss of one civilization might create the conditions for a new one somewhere else. And that brings us to a crucial question. If life here was seeded from elsewhere, what does that say about being the first civilization at all? If panspermia really happened, if life on Earth was seeded from beyond, then the story of civilization doesn't begin here at all. It begins somewhere else, sometimes so far back that the entire history of our planet might only represent the latest act in a cosmic chain. In that case, calling ourselves the first civilization would make as much sense as calling a leaf the first leaf on a tree that's been growing for billions of years. The key idea behind panspermia is continuity. It doesn't propose random sparks of life erupting in isolation. It suggests an unbroken lineage, a transfer of biological potential through space and time. So, if microbial life reached Earth on a meteorite or through comet dust, it might not have been the beginning of life at all, just the continuation of it. Every organism that's lived here, including us, would then be part of a much older biological heritage, tracing back to worlds long gone. And if that's true, then there's no obvious boundary separating the first civilization from later ones. Life, after all, is a system that learns. Even without memory in the human sense, DNA preserves the results of billions of years of trial and error. Every species carries information from its predecessors, lessons encoded in molecular patterns. Civilization could operate in a similar way, only on a cultural and technological level. If life can spread between planets, then maybe knowledge, or at least the capacity for it, can too. One possibility is that life reached Earth as simple microbes, tiny survivors from some ancient world that died when its star grew unstable or its atmosphere vanished. Those microbes didn't bring technology, but they brought the potential for it. Over billions of years, evolution took that spark and eventually built intelligence again. First through animals that learned, then through humans who remembered. In that scenario, we're the heirs of a cosmic process, not the originators of it. Civilization would be a recurring phenomenon, not a unique accident. But there's another possibility, one more unsettling, and, in some ways, more poetic. What if life didn't just drift here by chance, but was deliberately sent? That's the directed version of panspermia, the idea that a civilization somewhere in the galaxy intentionally seeded planets with the ingredients for life. If so, then we might literally be descendants, biological offspring, of beings who existed long before Earth formed. Their civilization, their technology, and their biology could all be gone, but their legacy would live on in us. Every thought we have, every invention, every act of creativity could be part of a lineage stretching across the stars. It's an extraordinary claim, and there's no direct evidence for it. But as a thought experiment, it helps frame what first really means. Maybe no civilization is truly first. Maybe civilization itself is a self-perpetuating pattern, one that emerges wherever life becomes complex enough to think and curious enough to reach beyond its own planet. Once that happens, the pattern continues, sometimes through colonization, sometimes through intentional seeding, sometimes through accidents of survival. Over time, it becomes a kind of cosmic recursion. Life creates civilization, civilization spreads life, life builds new civilizations, and the cycle repeats. If that's the case, our question shifts. Instead of asking, are we the first? We should ask, where in the sequence are we? Are we near the beginning of this galactic cycle, the first to awaken after billions of years of silent evolution? Or are we late arrivals, the latest in a long succession of civilizations, each one rising from the biological ashes of the last? There's even a biological analogy for this: horizontal gene transfer. Microbes often exchange genes directly across species, borrowing useful traits from one another. It's not linear evolution, it's a web of shared information. In a cosmic sense, panspermia could act the same way. Instead of a tree of life with a single root, maybe life across the galaxy is a network, a genetic internet spanning planets and epochs. If that's true, then civilization too might evolve through shared inheritance. Each new world that develops intelligence could be influenced, however subtly, by the biochemistry of the last. This perspective also reframes what we mean by alien. If our biology originated elsewhere, then aliens aren't truly foreign. They're family. They might share our molecular code, our carbon-based structure, even some genetic similarities. In fact, if we ever discover life on Mars or Europa that uses DNA and the same genetic alphabet, that would imply a shared ancestry, meaning panspermia is real, and our family tree extends beyond Earth. In that case, the first civilization wouldn't belong to one planet. It would belong to a cosmic lineage, one that includes us as a late but inevitable chapter. But what about the civilization that might have started it all? If life spreads naturally, then maybe there was never a single first. Just as there's no first wave in the ocean, there might be no first civilization in the universe. only overlapping ripples of life and intelligence, rising and falling as the universe matures. Still, if directed panspermia were ever proven true, it would imply there once was an origin, a people advanced enough to send their biology into space intentionally. Their civilization might have existed billions of years ago, long before our sun formed. We'd never know their faces or language, but their legacy could be written in every cell of our bodies. And that legacy carries a sobering implication. If life can move between worlds, then extinction might not be permanent. The end of one civilization could become the seed of another. Catastrophes that wipe out planets might not destroy life's progress. They might spread it. Supernovae, impacts, and cosmic dust storms could all serve as the universe's way of scattering life to new homes. In that sense, the death of one civilization might be necessary for the birth of the next. It's an elegant, almost self-correcting system. Life ensures its survival not through permanence, but through motion. It doesn't resist destruction. It uses it. Earth, Mars, and Venus could be examples of that cycle in different stages. One thriving, one dormant, one lost. Civilizations, like ecosystems, might come and go as part of that rhythm. From this point of view, the question, are we the first civilization, isn't about pride or uniqueness. It's about responsibility. If we're part of an ancient continuum, then our role isn't to be the beginning, but to make sure the chain continues. Whether through space exploration, genetic preservation, or simply surviving long enough to pass the spark forward, we might be the next link in the same cosmic relay that once seeded us. And if that's true, if we owe our existence to a civilization long vanished, then perhaps the most meaningful thing we can do is ensure we're not the last. But before imagining that future, it helps to explore the possible scenarios this cosmic chain might allow. Because depending on how life spread, Earth's place in this story could look very different, and each possibility changes what civilization really means. When we combine panspermia with the possibility of earlier civilizations, we end up with a set of thought experiments, different versions of how our story could fit into a much longer one. None of these scenarios can be proven yet, but each is grounded in some scientific logic, and each would completely reshape how we see ourselves if it turned out to be true. Scenario A, life was seeded, but humanity is the first civilization. This is the most conservative, and arguably the most likely interpretation. In this view, life arrived on Earth billions of years ago, maybe from Mars or maybe from farther away, carried by meteorites or dust. Once here, it took root, evolved, and diversified into everything from bacteria to trees to humans. We're still part of that original lineage, but civilization as we know it, cities, writing, technology, arose only once right here, within the last 10,000 years. If this scenario is true, then we really are the first civilization, at least in terms of intelligence capable of changing the planet. But even then, first doesn't mean unique. It just means we're the latest expression of a process that began somewhere else. Our origins would still be extraterrestrial, in the most literal sense. Our biology would carry a signature from another world. The evidence fits comfortably with what we already know. The chemistry of meteorites shows that amino acids and other organic molecules existed before Earth formed. Life appeared here quickly, after the planet cooled. So maybe the seeds were already here, waiting. In that case, panspermia doesn't require earlier civilizations, only earlier life. We'd be the first to build computers and telescopes, but not the first to emerge from cosmic dust. The implication is quietly humbling. Humanity's creativity, our drive to explore, our tendency to build and ask questions, those would all be downstream effects of a process that started long before us. We wouldn't be inventing civilization from scratch. We'd be continuing the universe's long experiment in self-awareness. Scenario B, an earlier Earth civilization existed and vanished. Now we step into more speculative territory. Imagine that life evolved here not just once, but multiple times, rising to complexity, achieving intelligence, and then disappearing long before our era. Maybe it was a species from an earlier epoch, an intelligent reptile, a cephalopod, or something entirely different that lived millions of years ago. It might have built societies, technologies, or even cities, only to be erased by the same geological forces we discussed earlier. In this scenario, Earth didn't just host life, it hosted history, deep history, far beyond our memory. Each cycle of civilization might have ended through climate collapse, asteroid impact, or self-destruction. The planet would then reset, slowly rebuilding ecosystems until intelligence rose again. If that's true, then human civilization isn't the first. It's just the most recent. We'd be part of an ongoing pattern, intelligence as a recurring phenomenon in Earth's long story. The same natural pressures that produce eyes and wings might, given enough time, also produce minds capable of reflection and invention. Intelligence wouldn't be an accident, it would be evolution's inevitable endpoint. What's eerie is how plausible that pattern feels. Life's resilience, its tendency to fill every niche, suggests that if conditions ever allow intelligence, it will find a way. And if earlier civilizations did exist, they wouldn't need to have looked like us. They could have used different senses, built with different materials, or even lived underwater or underground. After millions of years, they could vanish without leaving a single recognizable fossil, just a few geochemical quirks buried in ancient rock. This scenario raises a sobering point about the fragility of memory. Even if humanity achieved wonders spreading across the planet and beyond, a few million years might still erase nearly all evidence. If we're not careful, our own ruins could become the next geological riddle for whoever comes after. Scenario C. Life and civilization were seeded. Directed Panspermia. This version combines the two big ideas. Life didn't just arrive naturally, it was intentionally spread. Maybe a civilization elsewhere, facing extinction or simply exploring, engineered microorganisms to survive interstellar travel and programmed them with self-replicating genetic blueprints. Those microbes might carry encoded information, or just the biological instructions needed to evolve intelligence again. Earth, in that case, would be one of many seeded worlds, part of a deliberate effort to ensure life continues long after its originators are gone. It's a wild concept, but it's not entirely science fiction. Even today, humans can design bacteria with custom DNA sequences and send them into space. We can store data in synthetic genomes. Given another 1,000 years, we might realistically attempt to seed distant planets ourselves. So if another species reached that level of technology 1 billion years before us, they could have done exactly that. Directed Panspermia reframes civilization not as something that emerges by accident, but as something guided, maybe even curated. Every new world becomes an experiment, each civilization another iteration in a long cosmic project. In that case, we're not random products of evolution. We're participants in a chain of intent, unknowingly carrying forward the mission of beings who lived before stars like our sun even existed. Of course, that theory raises difficult questions. Who were they? Why did they do it? And would we ever be able to recognize their work if we saw it? If they embedded a signature in the genetic code, a message, a pattern, an unmistakable mathematical clue, would we even know how to read it? Some scientists have proposed looking for precisely that, unnatural regularities or symbolic encodings in DNA that couldn't have evolved randomly. So far, no such message has been found, but the idea lingers because it's testable. Scenario D. A civilization spread life without knowing it. There's a subtler middle ground between natural and directed panspermia, unintentional seeding. A spacefaring civilization could scatter life simply by exploring, sending probes, ships, or even waste materials between planets. Microbes from their own world could hitch a ride, survive in hidden pockets, and take root elsewhere. In that case, civilizations themselves become agents of panspermia, without meaning to be. This might already be happening. Earth's own spacecraft, despite sterilization efforts, are not perfectly clean. Some Earth microbes can survive the vacuum of space, radiation, and extreme temperature swings. If any lander carrying them crashes on Mars, Europa, or Titan, those microbes could potentially find niches to survive. That means humanity might already be spreading life, accidentally continuing the same process that once seeded us. If this pattern is universal, the galaxy could be full of contaminations that are actually the start of new biospheres. Life might not just adapt to space, it might rely on civilizations to carry it forward. In that sense, panspermia and civilization aren't separate phenomena. They're different phases of the same process. Scenario E. We are the civilization that will seed others. This is the most forward-looking possibility. Even if no civilization came before us, and even if life on Earth began here, we could still become the origin point for someone else. When humanity eventually reaches other worlds, Mars, exoplanets, or moons around distant stars, will bring our biology with us. Whether intentional or not, that will start new evolutionary experiments. If humans endure long enough to settle multiple systems, we might spread not just life, but culture and knowledge. Over time, our descendants could forget where they came from, or evolve into entirely new species. Millions of years later, if they looked back at their origins, they might ask the same question we're asking now: were we the first? In that sense, panspermia isn't just a theory about the past, it's a prediction about the future. The process doesn't stop with us, it continues through us. Each of these scenarios paints a different version of the same story. Life and intelligence as universal, recurring phenomena. Whether it started with random molecules, ancient engineers, or drifting microbes, the result is the same: a cosmos filled with the potential for consciousness. And no matter which version is true, one theme runs through them all. We are not isolated. Life connects us to the universe in ways that go far deeper than ancestry or geography. Whether we're the first civilization or the billionth, we're part of a pattern that's been unfolding for almost as long as the stars themselves. But if that's the case, if civilizations rise and fall and life keeps spreading, then the next logical question isn't just where did we come from? It's what does that make us now? What responsibilities come with being part of something so ancient and vast? Before we can answer that, we need to look at what these possibilities say about our place in the universe, and about how unique or not we really are. If even part of the panspermia story or the ancient civilization question holds up, then the biggest shift isn't scientific, it's psychological. It forces us to rethink what it means to be human. Our species has always built meaning around being special, the first, the chosen, the pinnacle of evolution. But if life didn't start here, or if civilization isn't a one-time phenomenon, then we're not the beginning of anything. We're the continuation. That idea doesn't make humanity smaller. It might make us more significant. It means we're part of a cosmic process that's been unfolding since before Earth existed, a process through which matter becomes aware of itself. Every human brain, every thought, every question we ask is the universe examining its own structure. Seen that way, being not first isn't a demotion. It's a kind of cosmic inheritance. Still, it's a tough perspective to swallow because it undermines a deep cultural assumption that we're the central event. For centuries, our worldview has been shaped by the idea that Earth is the centre of the story. First, we thought the universe revolved around us. Then we learned we revolve around the sun. Then we learned the sun is one of billions of stars in one of billions of galaxies. Now, ideas like panspermia and the Silurian hypothesis add another layer of humility. Maybe even life and civilization themselves aren't unique to us. This realization echoes through philosophy, religion, and science alike. If life is widespread and ancient, then intelligence might not be a rare cosmic accident, but a natural consequence of the laws of physics and chemistry. Every world with stable conditions might eventually evolve beings who look up, wonder, and build. That doesn't diminish our achievements, it universalizes them. Our creativity, empathy, and curiosity could be common threads woven through the fabric of life everywhere. It also reshapes how we think about progress. In our current view, human civilization is a straight climb from ignorance to technology. But if civilizations have come and gone before, on Earth or elsewhere, then progress isn't a straight line at all. It's cyclical. The universe might be full of forgotten rises and falls, of species that reached for the stars and vanished, leaving only faint chemical fingerprints behind. We might be just one more iteration in a long evolutionary relay. That perspective can be unsettling because it undermines permanence. If everything eventually disappears, if even civilizations fade into geology, what's the point? But there's another way to see it. The fact that civilizations may come and go doesn't make them meaningless. It makes them essential. Each one is a chapter in an ongoing story that only exists because it keeps renewing itself. Life survives not by standing still, but by starting over. And that means our role might not be to be first or last, but to be a bridge, to pass on the spark that reached us. That's what nature has been doing since the beginning. Preserving the information that works, letting the rest fall away. If we see ourselves as part of that, then our sense of purpose changes. Exploration, science, art, even kindness become ways of keeping that spark alive. There's also a practical side to this rethinking. If we're not the first, then somewhere out there, others might have faced what we're facing now. Climate change, resource exhaustion, the struggle to balance growth with sustainability. If civilizations are common, their failures might be common too. Maybe most of them don't survive long enough to leave evidence. That could explain the eerie silence we hear in the cosmos, the great filter that scientists talk about in the context of the Fermi paradox. Perhaps civilizations tend to self-destruct before they concede others. If so, then our task isn't just to survive for ourselves, it's to break that pattern. That's where humility becomes strength. Seeing ourselves as part of a larger chain could change how we treat our planet and each other. If Earth is one of the few worlds lucky enough to host conscious life, then protecting it becomes not just an environmental goal, but a cosmic duty. Our actions decide whether the story continues or stops with us. This also reframes exploration. Going to Mars or eventually beyond the solar system wouldn't just be adventure, it would be continuity. Every probe, every mission, every colony would carry forward the legacy of life that might have started somewhere else, and now depends on us to take the next step. If Panspermia began the chain, we might be the first link in its new phase, intentional, self-aware propagation. On a more personal level, this perspective might even change how we think about identity. We tend to define ourselves by nationality, culture, or species. But if our deepest ancestry extends to other planets or other civilizations, then identity becomes something universal. Every molecule in our bodies was forged in ancient stars. Every gene carries traces of life's earliest experiments. If those origins connect us to the cosmos, then our story isn't separate from it. We are the cosmos remembering itself. That realization can sound abstract, but it's also grounding. It means that even if we vanish someday, if human civilization disappears like those hypothetical ones before us, the pattern of life will go on. Somewhere else, the same questions will rise again. What are we? Where did we come from? Are we alone? Each civilization might reach the same moment of awareness and ask those same questions, unaware that countless others once did too. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the universe doesn't care who's first or last. It just keeps creating opportunities for awareness to happen. Life, in all its forms, is the mechanism for that. We're one manifestation among many, temporary but meaningful because we get to see it, question it, and shape it while we're here. So, are we unique? In one sense, yes, no other species is exactly like us. But in the grander sense, probably not. Intelligence, creativity, even civilization might be as common as starlight, emerging wherever the conditions allow. If panspermia is true, then life is the universe's default state, not its exception. That realization doesn't make humanity smaller. It gives us context. It tells us that being not first doesn't mean being unimportant. It means being connected to something unimaginably old and vast, something still unfolding. And if that's our place in the cosmos, then perhaps our greatest contribution isn't what we invent or conquer, but what we preserve. The continuity of life and awareness that began long before we arrived and will, if we're careful, outlast us by eons. But that continuity leads naturally to another question. If we're part of this ancient network of life, how should it change the way we search for others? What does panspermia, and the idea that we might not be first, mean for how we look for intelligence beyond Earth? If life and even civilization are part of a repeating cosmic pattern, then our search for others, what we call SETI and astrobiology, needs to be reframed. For decades, SETI has been driven by a simple question: are we alone? But if panspermia and deep-time civilizations are part of the picture, then the better question might be, where else has life already been, and how many times has it started over? CT, traditionally, has focused on listening for signals, radio transmissions, laser pulses, or any sign of technology from distant stars. It's an approach built on the assumption that intelligent life is rare and that other civilizations, if they exist, would still be active and transmitting. But panspermia changes that logic. It suggests that life could be widespread, and civilizations might rise and fall across billions of years, leaving behind not beacons, but residues. In that view, the silence we hear from the galaxy might not mean no one's there. It might mean we're surrounded by the ghosts of civilizations that have already come and gone. Astrobiology has already begun to adapt to that idea. Instead of only searching for active signals, scientists now look for technosignatures, evidence of technology long after its creators are gone. These could include atmospheric anomalies, artificial chemicals, orbital debris, or even Dyson sphere-like structures capturing a star's energy. But if civilizations vanish easily, many of their technosignatures might be subtle, buried, or degraded. We might need to look not for shining radio calls, but for quiet, geological, or planetary fingerprints, the kind that might persist for millions of years. That's where the link to the Silurian hypothesis becomes powerful. Earth itself could serve as a test case for detecting dead civilizations. If we can identify what our own Anthropocene signal would look like millions of years from now, we can use those same criteria to study exoplanets. When telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope or the upcoming Habitable Worlds Observatory examine distant worlds, they can detect atmospheric gases, surface temperatures, and even seasonal variations. If one of those planets shows a strange imbalance, like high methane and oxygen together, or industrial pollutants that don't match volcanic or biological patterns, that could be the distant echo of a civilization, long gone but still chemically etched into its world. Even in our solar system, we're starting to think this way. Mars, Venus, and even the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn are now viewed not just as possible homes for microbes, but as potential time capsules. Mars may have had oceans and a thicker atmosphere billions of years ago. Venus might once have been temperate before its runaway greenhouse effect. If life ever thrived on either world, its remnants, microbial fossils, isotopic anomalies, or mineral patterns, might still exist beneath their surfaces. If we found those, the next question would be whether that life shares our biochemistry. That's the real test for panspermia, genetic or structural similarity across worlds. If we find life on Mars that uses DNA, the same amino acids, and the same handedness of molecules, left-handed for amino acids, right-handed for sugars, that would be powerful evidence of a shared origin. If it's completely different, using different molecules or chirality, then life probably emerged independently. Either outcome is extraordinary. Shared ancestry would prove life spreads across planets. Independent origins would prove life emerges easily wherever it can. Both scenarios make the universe feel more alive. SETI researchers are also expanding the search beyond traditional radio waves. Some projects now look for waste heat signatures, infrared glows that might come from large-scale energy use, or for brief, intense flashes of light that could indicate laser communication. Others scan the galaxy for artificial elements like chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which don't occur naturally, but persist for centuries in atmospheres. A planet with detectable CFCs might be in its industrial phase, or might have been, long ago. In that sense, SETI is becoming as much archaeology as it is astronomy. The concept of interstellar archaeology has gained traction in recent years. Instead of expecting living civilizations, scientists are asking what remnants might endure after extinction. A defunct orbital ring, a layer of artificial isotopes, or a Dyson structure decaying around a dead star could all reveal intelligence without communication. Even the strange objects we've recently observed passing through our solar system, like Oumuamua, have triggered debate about whether some interstellar objects could be remnants of technology, solar sails, probes, or debris from long-lost civilizations. Most likely they're natural, but the fact that we can now seriously ask those questions shows how the conversation is shifting. Astrobiology, meanwhile, is increasingly aware that life and planets evolve together. If panspermia is real, the universe might function as one vast ecological system, with life continuously migrating between worlds. Instead of treating planets as isolated habitats, we could think of them as nodes in a living network, connected by comets, asteroids, and interstellar dust. In that framework, civilizations become agents of evolution, accelerating the spread of life, whether deliberately or by accident. Humanity's exploration of space might already be part of that natural process. If that's true, then discovering extraterrestrial life might not be about meeting aliens. It might be about recognizing our relatives. The more we understand about chemistry, biology, and the conditions that make life possible, the more we realize how similar the rules are everywhere. Carbon chemistry works the same across the galaxy. The elements that make up DNA, Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus are among the most abundant in the universe. There's nothing rare about the ingredients of life, which makes it harder to believe we're the only result. And yet there's that silence, the persistent absence of evidence. SETI's decades of listening have turned up no unambiguous signals. The skies remain quiet. That silence could mean many things. Civilizations are rare, they don't last long, or they communicate in ways we can't yet detect. But the Panspermia framework suggests another possibility. Civilizations aren't rare, they're ancient. Most might have risen and fallen long before our time, their signals long faded, their worlds sterilized or repurposed by nature. In that sense, the universe might not be empty. It might just be old. That realization gives SETI a new sense of purpose. Instead of searching only for neighbours, we might also be studying our ancestors. The first alien civilization we detect might not be living. It might be long extinct, its memory preserved in planetary chemistry or derelict technology. Discovering that would still be revolutionary. It would prove that intelligence isn't unique to Earth and that civilization is a recurring event in the universe. Astrobiology's role, then, is to build the bridge between life's chemistry and civilization's consequences. It's about finding the continuum, from simple molecules in comets to global industrial imprints in atmospheres. Whether life began on Earth or elsewhere, every discovery we make points to the same conclusion. Life is stubborn, adaptable, and likely far older than we imagine. That, in turn, leads us to a profound responsibility. If the cosmos is full of lost civilizations, then we're one of the few that still exists. We might be the link that carries life's legacy forward. SETI and astrobiology aren't just about curiosity, they're about survival, about ensuring the continuity of a process that may stretch back billions of years. So when we listen to the stars, or drill into Martian soil, we're not just looking for others, we're listening for echoes of ourselves. And if we ever hear one, even faintly, it will tell us something simple, but life-changing. We are not the beginning. We are part of a chain so long and so ancient that the question, are we alone, becomes irrelevant. The real question is, how far does this chain reach? And are we ready to keep it going? That brings us to the practical side of this discussion. How we could actually test these ideas. What would it take, scientifically, to know for sure whether life and civilization have been cycling through planets long before us? It's one thing to speculate about panspermia and lost civilizations, and another to turn those ideas into testable science. But that's exactly what researchers are beginning to do. The strength of both hypotheses, the panspermia model and the Silurian hypothesis, is that despite their scale, they can be probed with real data. We can look for physical, chemical, and biological fingerprints that either support or contradict them. The key is knowing where and how to look. The first step lies in space missions. The best way to test panspermia is by comparing Earth life to potential life elsewhere in our solar system. Mars is the prime candidate. Its surface today is harsh, but beneath its crust may lie preserved microbial fossils, or even dormant life. NASA's Perseverance rover is already collecting samples that will eventually be returned to Earth. If those samples show structures resembling microfossils or contain organic compounds that share Earth's biochemistry, the implications would be enormous. Shared genetic coding, if it exists, would practically confirm that life here and life there share a common ancestor. The icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, Europa and Enceladus, offer another testing ground. Both have subsurface oceans rich in chemistry and heat sources that could sustain life. Spacecraft like Europa Clipper and Dragonfly are being designed to probe these environments. Finding life in them would raise a profound question. Did it evolve independently, or was it seeded from the same source that began life on Earth? If all these worlds share one genetic blueprint, panspermia stops being a theory and becomes history. We can also test panspermia by studying meteorites more closely. Some, like ALH 84001 from Mars, already contain organic compounds that might be biogenic. Scientists are refining techniques to look for specific isotopic ratios, amino acid chirality, and molecular patterns that distinguish biological from non-biological chemistry. If we ever find unmistakable microfossils in meteorites, that would prove that life, or its remnants, can survive interplanetary travel. There's also laboratory testing. Researchers simulate impacts to see if microbes can endure the ejection from a planet, the freezing of space, and the shock of re-entry. Some extremophiles have already passed parts of these tests. Deinococcus radiodurans can survive radiation doses thousands of times higher than humans can. Spores of Bacillus subtilis have endured 6 years outside the International Space Station, when shielded from ultraviolet light. Step by step, scientists are showing that the mechanisms required for panspermia are physically possible. The next step is genomic archaeology, looking for clues of extraterrestrial ancestry in our own DNA. Some biologists are investigating whether Earth's genetic code shows signs of having been optimized or influenced by earlier biochemistry. For example, if we found unnatural mathematical patterns embedded in the codon structure, patterns that couldn't arise through natural selection, that might indicate intentional design, or at least an earlier inheritance. So far, no such patterns have been found, but our understanding of genetic complexity is still evolving. What seems random today might reveal deeper order tomorrow. Testing the idea of earlier Earth civilizations requires a different toolkit. It's less about biology and more about geology and geochemistry. Scientists can search for unusual isotopic spikes, synthetic materials, or sudden shifts in the carbon cycle that can't be explained by natural processes. We already use this method to identify events like asteroid impacts and volcanic eruptions. For instance, the global iridium layer that marks the dinosaur extinction tells us an asteroid hit Earth 66 million years ago. Similarly, a layer with unusual heavy metal ratios or plastic-derived polymers could someday indicate industrial activity. To make that search systematic, we need to map Earth's ancient sediments in finer detail. Deep-sea drilling programs and continental cores could be analysed for industrial age analogues, strange isotopic fingerprints, unnatural compounds, or radiation signatures inconsistent with known events. One proposed idea is to look for long-lived isotopes like plutonium-244 or technetium-99 in very old rock layers. These isotopes don't occur naturally today, and their presence could only come from artificial nuclear reactions. So far, no such findings exist, but no one has looked thoroughly enough to rule them out either. Another approach is planetary comparison. If we ever find industrial-like traces on another planet, say elevated carbon levels in Martian rocks that match Earth's modern pollution patterns, that would raise fascinating possibilities. Were both worlds industrialized independently, or could one have seeded the other, not with biology but with technology? To test for directed panspermia, the search might turn to information theory. If a civilization intentionally seeded life, it might have left a signature embedded in the genetic code, a universal calling card meant to be discovered once a species becomes intelligent enough to read it. Mathematicians have explored the idea of symbolic patterns in DNA, such as prime number sequences or geometric ratios. None have been conclusively found, but the search continues. The absence of a message doesn't disprove directed panspermia, but finding one would instantly validate it. We can also use space-based observation to test for long-gone civilizations beyond Earth. When astronomers examine exoplanet atmospheres, they look for disequilibrium, gas combinations that don't make sense naturally. High oxygen and methane together, for instance, suggest biology. But artificial chemicals like chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, or nitrogen trifluoride could indicate industrial activity. Even if those substances no longer exist, their photochemical byproducts might persist for centuries or millennia. Detecting them would be like finding a cosmic ruin, a whisper of technology long extinct. Another way to test these ideas is through cosmic archaeology, looking for large-scale artifacts in the universe itself. For example, partial Dyson spheres, orbital rings, or waste heat from megastructures could all signal intelligent activity. These are extreme possibilities, but data from infrared surveys like WISE and JWST are already being analysed for such anomalies. Even a single confirmed example would rewrite our understanding of the universe. Closer to home, the Moon might hold our best record of cosmic history. Unlike Earth, the Moon has no atmosphere, no weather, and almost no geological activity. Its surface preserves a near-perfect archive of what has fallen upon it, including dust, meteorites, and possibly fragments from Earth's deep past. If an earlier terrestrial civilization existed and any debris escaped into space, some of it might still be on the Moon. A future lunar excavation could, in theory, find traces of ancient technology, ours or someone else's. But perhaps the most powerful test of all is philosophical. To continue searching carefully, with skepticism and wonder in equal measure. Both panspermia and the idea of prior civilizations demand that we expand our perspective, but neither asks for blind belief. They push science to its limits while staying within its method, asking questions that can, at least in principle, be answered. Every sample we return from Mars, every ice plume we analyse from Enceladus, every exoplanet spectrum we measure, adds data to the same question. Is life and intelligence local, or is it universal? So far we have only one confirmed example, Earth. But we're on the verge of finding out whether that's an illusion born of time and distance. The irony is that by searching for others, we might end up understanding ourselves. If panspermia turns out to be true, then our origins stretch far beyond this planet. If ancient civilizations once existed, then our story is not a beginning but a continuation. In both cases, humanity becomes not the centre of creation, but its latest expression, a cosmic echo that still remembers enough to ask where the first sound came from. And if we ever do find proof, an alien microbe that shares our DNA, an isotope that shouldn't exist, or a message written in the code of life, it won't just answer a scientific question. It will change the way we see every living thing around us. It will remind us that all life, past and future, is connected by the same fragile, enduring thread. Before we finish, though, there's one last piece to consider. These ideas inspire awe, but they also carry risks, misinterpretation, pseudoscience, and the temptation to see patterns where none exist. Understanding where the line lies between imagination and evidence is crucial if we're to keep this conversation grounded in reality. Anytime science brushes up against questions of deep origins or vanished civilizations, the boundary between careful reasoning and fantasy gets blurry. Panspermia and the idea of pre-human civilizations sit right on that edge. They invite wonder, but they also attract distortion. For every serious scientist studying ancient isotopic ratios or microbial survivability in space, there are dozens of wild claims about alien architects, secret fossils, and coded messages in monuments. The danger isn't curiosity itself, it's losing the discipline that keeps curiosity honest. The history of this topic shows how easily that happens. When people first learned that meteorites could fall from the sky, many dismissed the idea as superstition. Then, once it was proven, the pendulum swung the other way. Suddenly every mysterious stone was from space. The same pattern repeats with panspermia. The legitimate version is a modest, testable proposal that microscopic life or its building blocks can move between worlds. The pseudo-scientific version inflates it into stories of visiting aliens, engineered humans, or conspiracies to hide the truth. Part of the problem is that both panspermia and ancient civilization theories play into our oldest narrative instincts. They echo creation myths, resurrection stories, and lost golden ages. The idea that we came from the stars or that ancient knowledge once surpassed ours feels emotionally satisfying. It connects us to something greater. But emotional truth isn't scientific truth. Science's strength is its willingness to let evidence, not desire, decide what's real. The Silurian hypothesis itself was born out of frustration with pseudoscience. Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank published their 2018 paper precisely because they wanted to draw a line between testable speculation and unfounded belief. Their question: could we detect an earlier civilization in the geological record? Wasn't meant to prove that one existed. It was meant to explore how science would even go about looking. Their conclusion was sobering. Even if such a civilization had existed, we might not find it. That humility is what separates their work from fantasy. It shows that good science can entertain big questions without abandoning skepticism. Misinterpretation often starts when ideas like these leak into pop culture, stripped of their context. A scientific maybe becomes a headline. Proof. A single anomaly, a strange rock, an odd isotope ratio, a peculiar artifact, gets blown up into evidence of a cover-up. The pattern is old, Atlantis, ancient astronauts, pyramids as power plants, lost technologies hidden by elites. These claims thrive on the same psychological appeal, the thrill of secret knowledge. They also tap into distrust of institutions, framing science itself as the thing keeping truth hidden. But real science doesn't work that way. It's slow, repetitive, and public. Every extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence and extraordinary patience. The evidence for panspermia or ancient civilizations isn't being suppressed. It's just incredibly hard to find, buried in the noise of geological time. The few legitimate hints we have, organic meteorites, isotopic anomalies, extremophiles surviving space exposure, are carefully debated, not dismissed. That's how science protects its integrity. Another risk is confirmation bias, the tendency to see what we want to see. When people search for evidence of earlier civilizations, it's easy to mistake natural formations for artifacts or coincidences for patterns. The famous face on Mars, for instance, looked like a sculpted monument in early, low-resolution photos. Higher-resolution images later revealed it was just a rocky hill. That doesn't mean the idea was foolish. It means our brains are wired to find order, even where there is none, recognizing that bias is essential if we want our search for truth to stay honest. There's also a subtler trap, the romanticism of the unknown. Some people treat uncertainty as proof that anything goes. You can't disprove it becomes a substitute for there's reason to believe it. But absence of evidence is not evidence of conspiracy or truth. It's just absence. When scientists say, we don't know, that's not weakness, it's the point of the method. It marks the line between curiosity and dogma. Still, skepticism shouldn't turn into cynicism. Rejecting pseudoscience doesn't mean dismissing wonder. Many ideas once mocked as fringe, continental drift, meteorite impacts, even the idea of microbes causing disease, turned out to be correct once evidence caught up. The key difference was rigor. When an idea can be tested, measured, and potentially proven wrong, it earns a place in science. Panspermia is in that category. It might not be confirmed yet, but it can be tested, step by step, through missions, experiments, and analysis. The notion of earlier Earth civilizations, in contrast, is harder to test but still grounded in the same logic. If it happened, something should remain, however faint. The real harm of pseudoscience isn't that it asks strange questions, it's that it stops too soon. It replaces patient investigation with satisfying stories. It treats imagination as evidence. And in doing so, it cheapens the wonder it pretends to protect. The truth, as science finds it, is often slower, subtler, and less dramatic, but ultimately far more awe-inspiring. Because when science works, it gives us something myth never could, a way to know. The discovery of amino acids in meteorites, the survival of microbes in space, the detection of organic molecules on Mars, these are real, verifiable pieces of a story far grander than any legend. They tell us that the building blocks of life are everywhere, that the conditions for biology are not unique, and that our existence is part of a universal pattern. That's not less magical than ancient aliens or lost empires. It's more profound because it's true. So the challenge is balance. Stay open but grounded, imaginative but skeptical. The biggest questions about life's origins, cosmic ancestry, and civilization cycles require both qualities. If we lean too hard towards skepticism, we risk missing what's possible. If we lean too hard toward fantasy, we lose what's real. The middle ground is where discovery happens. That balance also protects science's credibility. When we talk about panspermia or potential ancient civilizations, we're walking a narrow ridge between evidence and speculation. To stay on it, we have to remember what evidence looks like: repeatable, measurable, peer-reviewed, and open to challenge. That's the only way to keep ideas like these from turning into ideology. In the end, the value of exploring these questions isn't in proving we're not alone, or that we're not first. It's in learning how to think clearly about things that are almost too big to imagine. That skill, staying curious without surrendering to fantasy, is what makes science one of the most human things we do. And yet, even with all our caution, it's hard not to wonder. If we found proof tomorrow, clear, undeniable evidence of another civilization, ancient or alien, what would it do to us? How would it change our understanding of history, of ourselves, and of our place in the cosmos. Imagine this. Tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the world flashes the same headline: "We are not alone." Maybe it's NASA confirming microbial life in a Martian rock sample. Maybe it's the James Webb Space Telescope detecting artificial pollutants in the atmosphere of an exoplanet. Or maybe more dramatically, geologists uncover an ancient layer of Earth's crust containing synthetic isotopes, proof that something advanced once walked this planet long before us. What happens next isn't just a scientific event, it's a psychological earthquake. For the first time in human history, the story we tell about ourselves would have to expand beyond Earth. Religions, philosophies, and sciences that have evolved around the idea of human centrality would need to adapt. The discovery wouldn't necessarily contradict faith. It might even reinforce it for some. But it would change the context completely. We'd know we're part of a lineage that predates our species, maybe even our planet. The first reaction, inevitably, would be wonder. Billions of people would look up at the sky differently. The old abstract idea of life elsewhere would become concrete, factual. There would be an immediate hunger for answers. What are they like? When did they exist? Are they still out there? And behind those questions, a subtler one: what does that make us? For scientists, the next step would be verification. Every lab, telescope, and university would turn its attention to the evidence. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary scrutiny. If it were a microbe from Mars, researchers would check for contamination, replicate analyses, and test for DNA or other recognizable biochemistry. If it was something in Earth's geological record, they'd rule out natural causes one by one. Volcanic activity, meteor impacts, metamorphic transformations, before accepting that the anomaly was truly artificial. Once confirmed, the floodgates would open. Funding for astrobiology, exoplanet research, and planetary missions would skyrocket. CT programs would expand overnight. Scientists would scour every signal, every spectrum, every crater, every ice core for more traces. The same way early biologists raced to decode DNA, we'd race to trace our cosmic lineage. And then, after the initial shock, the existential questions would set in. If panspermia is true, if we came from elsewhere, then we'd have to redefine human origins. Our ancestors wouldn't just be apes, they'd be microbes that crossed interplanetary, maybe interstellar distances. The history of life would stretch from Earth's ancient oceans to the wider galaxy. If the discovery were of a civilization, not just life, the shift would be even greater. Archaeologists, geologists, and historians would face the most profound challenge imaginable: deciphering a civilization older than our species. Were they biological like us, technological? Did they leave messages, symbols, or patterns in DNA or geology for future intelligences to find? We'd suddenly become not just scientists, but students of a species long gone, inheritors of a story written across worlds. The ripple effects would reach every part of culture. Art, literature, and philosophy would bloom with new interpretations of what it means to be alive in a populated universe. School textbooks would be rewritten. Space exploration would transform from curiosity into heritage, something we owe to the process that made us. And for the first time, the human race might see itself as one species, unified by the realization that we're part of something larger and older than any nation, religion, or ideology. But it wouldn't all be wonder, there would also be fear. The discovery of prior civilizations, especially if they destroyed themselves, would force us to confront our own fragility. If they vanished, what does that mean for us? If panspermia spreads life but can't guarantee its survival, are we just another step in an endless cycle of creation and collapse? The idea of not being first might comfort us intellectually, but unsettle us emotionally. It would remind us that everything we build could someday be forgotten, folded back into the planet's geology, like all that came before. Still, some would see that as liberation. If civilizations come and go but life continues, then our purpose isn't to last forever. It's to keep the chain going. Discovery would transform the way we think about exploration. Instead of reaching outward for conquest or curiosity alone, we'd do it to preserve continuity, to ensure the spark that reached us continues its journey through time and space. The discovery would also push science toward new questions. We'd want to know how old that other civilization was, how it lived, and what ended it. If its remnants were extraterrestrial, We'd search for signals or surviving technology. If they were terrestrial, we'd study their chemical and cultural impact. In either case, we'd be forced to see Earth not as humanity's stage, but as one of many in a long cosmic sequence. The practical consequences would unfold in unpredictable ways. Governments might form new international agencies to coordinate research, manage artifacts, or even prepare for future contact. Religions would debate meaning. Philosophers would debate ethics. What responsibilities come with knowing we're part of a wider web of life? And ordinary people, in every corner of the world, would grapple with a simple but overwhelming truth. The universe is alive and we are not its first voice. There's a paradox here. For centuries, humans have feared being insignificant in the vastness of space. But if we found evidence of others, whether microbes or ancient builders, it might make us feel more connected than ever. It would mean we belong to a shared cosmic heritage, one that stretches beyond memory and even beyond biology. We wouldn't just be residents of Earth, we'd be participants in the universe's ongoing experiment with consciousness. And in the long run, that realization might do what no ideology or institution ever has: unite us. If we're not the first and certainly not the only, then the differences that divide us, race, religion, borders, start to look trivial. What would matter most is survival, knowledge, and the continuity of life itself. So if that headline ever appears, "We are not the first," the question won't be whether it's true. The evidence will speak for itself. The real question will be, what do we do next? Do we retreat into disbelief, or do we finally begin to see ourselves as part of a vast, ancient story, one that's still being written, and in which we now hold the pen? Because the moment we confirm that we're not the first civilization, everything changes. History would no longer begin with us. It would begin with life itself, wherever it first found a home. And the future, for the first time, would feel like a continuation, not an invention. That brings us to the final turn of this journey. What all of this, panspermia, deep time, ancient civilizations, really means for us right now, and what it should leave us thinking about once the wonder fades. After all the speculation, science, and what-ifs, everything we've explored, panspermia, ancient civilizations, planetary amnesia, comes back to one central idea: continuity. Life doesn't stand still. It moves, adapts, collapses, and reappears. Whether that continuity stretches across galaxies or just across epochs on one planet, it's the thread that links chemistry to consciousness. If panspermia is real, it means we're part of a biological network older than Earth itself. Every cell in our bodies carries information that began somewhere else, perhaps in a long-lost ocean under another sun. If earlier civilizations once thrived here, it means intelligence is not a one-time accident, but a natural outcome of that ancient network. In both cases, humanity isn't an exception to nature. It's one of nature's recurring expressions. That view changes what being first means. Maybe there never was a first civilization, just as there's no first wave on the sea. Each arises from what came before, shaped by the same forces, fading to make room for the next. Our technologies, our cities, even our mistakes are echoes of that same process. Matter organizing itself into thought. Thought reorganizing matter. It also changes what progress means. We like to imagine civilization as a ladder climbing toward perfection. But maybe it's more like a heartbeat, expanding, contracting, resetting, and expanding again. If earlier civilizations have existed and vanished, their erasure isn't a tragedy in cosmic terms, it's part of life's rhythm. The challenge for us is to make our rhythm last a little longer, to build something durable enough that the next intelligence, whether born on Earth or elsewhere, can inherit more than fossils and isotopes. That's why the search for life and intelligence beyond Earth is more than curiosity. It's self-knowledge. Every rover, telescope, and probe is an act of memory. Our attempt to find our beginnings so we can decide what kind of ancestors we want to be. If we discover that life has been travelling between worlds for billions of years, then space exploration stops being optional. It becomes the continuation of what life has always done, reaching out, surviving change, seeding possibility. At the same time, the idea of vanished civilizations reminds us how fragile we are. The same Earth that nurtures us will someday erase us. If we want our story to outlast geology, we'll have to move beyond this planet. That's not arrogance, it's adaptation. Every species that survives does so by moving when conditions change. The difference is that we can choose where to go and what lessons to carry with us. Whether we're the descendants of ancient microbes or the only civilization this planet has ever known, our existence is still a miracle of timing and chemistry. We're the result of 4 billion years of persistence, luck, and self-organization. Understanding that should make us careful stewards of the continuity we've inherited. We might not be the first, but we could ensure we're not the last. And perhaps that's the real takeaway. The question, what if we're not the first, isn't meant to diminish humanity. It's meant to remind us that our time here is both fleeting and precious. We're part of a vast process, but right now, we're the part that knows it. The atoms that once drifted between stars are, for a brief moment, aware of themselves. That awareness carries responsibility. To keep the story going, to make it richer, and to hand it off intact to whoever comes next. If the Panspermia hypothesis is correct, then life didn't start here. But right now, it continues here. Through us. Our task isn't to guard the spark as if it were ours. It's to pass it forward across generations, planets, and time. So maybe we're not the first civilization. Maybe we're just the current chapter in the universe's autobiography. Either way, it's a privilege to be the ones holding the pen.